I just spent 2 weeks recovering from a hard drive failure. I did some things right, I did some things wrong, and I want to pass on to you how you can safeguard yourself against such events and recover as quickly as possible from a massive computer failure. All this today on Success in RPGs. Wait, what's happening? My computer, No! Okay, so what happened, you might ask? I'll give you the quick version of it just in case it's helpful. I had a situation where one day I turn on my computer and I see a blue screen. And by the way, this video, I use a Windows machine, but a lot of this will apply to a Mac. Just, if I say PC, I just mean a computer, and the Mac will have most of the concepts be very similar. So I boot up my computer. It's a blue screen. I go, that's weird. And I boot again, and it happens again. Maybe what happened was a power outage that happened during a Windows update the previous night. But it's not entirely clear. Either way, I could not get out of this blue screen of death that Windows users can experience. And no matter what I tried, couldn't progress beyond that. So I eventually took my whole desktop in to a computer shop. And that repair person, who was awesome, took a look at it and tried out all kinds of things, swapping parts of my computer out, seeing what triggered it. In the end, I found, in the middle, I found that it was bad RAM, 2 sticks of RAM, and a bad primary hard drive, the boot drive that boots up the whole computer. So I replaced those, which was not fun or cheap to do. And then I reinstalled everything, and it happened again. And it turned out that my secondary drive also had a problem. It's very unusual. I can't say that I can make a lot of sense about it, but this video is really about how to be in a position that when something like this happens, and I take care of my stuff, my computers, my gadgets, my everything. I am very careful with things. Things usually last forever for me. I have never had anything remotely like this happen in the past. But here I was, unable to log into my PC, unable to get to my things. And as I restored all my software, I learned that I had done some things really well and other things really needed to have been done better. And I am now taking those actions. So in this video, I'm going to share how to do that. Let's talk about why this matters, the impact of it all. So, I was in a situation where I was fortunately not in the middle of a project, but imagine that I had been 15,000 words or 50,000 words into a project and some deadline is looming and I can't get to my files or I can't finish my work, right? Something that did happen to me a few days later because I honestly spent about 2 weeks on this issue. Imagine you've got a podcast to record and you don't have your podcast recording software available or your microphone that connects to a digital input that is part of your PC. You can't just fire up a laptop and record a quality show. So that is all not functioning. I use video and podcast, both capture software and processing software to edit it to produce the show. None of that was available, right? So everything just shuts down. You can't do the things that you want to do, whether it's writing, cartography, illustration, editing, any of it. The whole thing, we use our computers for it. And if we can't access our files or the software, we're toast. So the impact of this can be substantial. It could also be financial. And in a worst case, imagine that not only is it that I have some downtime for a while, but that I lose everything, right? So you're looking at this screen of OBS. This took a long time to put together. If I lose all of this, I've got to start from scratch and set it all up. If I lose all my files, that would be incalculable, right? I have all kinds of files that I use for reference points, how-tos, all the work I've done over the years. If I lost that, that'd be significant, right? So it can really matter tremendously, both from software to data, to preserve all of this if some catastrophic failure happens. So the first thing we can do is to minimize data loss. We can take strategies so that we're not going to lose our files, right? The things that we work on, whatever your type of creation is, we want to be in a position where we're not going to lose this material, right? So one thing we can do, it's very, very kind of basic level, is to have more than one hard drive. This is particularly easy on a PC. Hard drives are very cheap. So you can have your hard drive that's used to boot up your operating system like Windows, and then a separate drive where you place data. This means if your primary drive fails and your computer can't be read, and the file gets corrupted, the data might be lost, you're not out of luck. You have a totally separate drive. And so if you need to, you could have a whole new computer and just take that other hard drive, plug it in there, and access it after just minimal work, right? So by having a secondary drive where all of your data lives, you're protected to some extent against data loss. If you recall my story, I had 2 drives fail. The good news is I could read from them. They were causing problems, but it's always possible that you could be worse than that. So there's another step here, which is to have cloud access of some sort. And there are free solutions for this. There are many, many paid solutions for this. But having some way that your data is not just on a physical drive, but also up in cloud storage where some company is backing this up constantly, or you have a separate way that you're running cloud storage, something like that, does 2 things. First, it acts as a third location where your data is located, and it also means that you can access this data from anywhere. So, for example, I have a second hard drive. Part of that second hard drive lives on Dropbox. What that means is when my computer was down, I could access all of those Dropbox files from my laptop or from my phone or from anywhere else I needed to without having to recover the hard drive that I had, right? So that was super helpful to be able to get to those files. Then, third thing we can do is to regularly back up all of our files. So in my situation, I have a separate device that I have, an external hard drive to which I back up all of my data, and then I place it in a fire safe. And ideally, you have this backup is in somewhere different, so that if you have something really major like a fire or something horrible like that, you will have that data available, right? The cloud helps with that. So if all of your data is on the cloud, then you've fulfilled that obligation and could back up to that location. But if you have something like my situation, I have some of it on the cloud, but all of it is backed up regularly. That means I can always get to my files and I'm protected from that data loss. Oh, and I should add, part of backups that's important is that these backups are being done routinely, right? At some interval that matches how often you're making changes to the data. It doesn't help to have last year's data. If you wrote a 50,000 word project and that isn't part of that backup, you have lost that project. So you need to have backups that are happening as regularly as you are doing work, right? If you regularly are saving a lot of podcast episodes that haven't yet been put up onto the podcast host or YouTube videos or whatever, if you have a whole bunch of things that you might lose, then you've got to back up with that cadence, right? So that's super important. The backup cadence matches how you are creating things, and that way you're not going to lose things in between backups. There's always the chance of losing something, but if that interval is low and matches your work, then it's negligible, right? It's easy to redo that small portion and you haven't lost a lot. However, so all of this, I had done this really well, and I felt really good about it. What I had failed to realize is how, especially on a Windows machine, but it's true of Macs as well, you can have all of this data backed up, but complicated software has a lot of settings. Well, let's pull back a second to software recovery in general. So there are a couple steps you can take that will put you in a good place to be able to reinstall everything, right? Imagine a situation where you lose your primary drive, as I did. You buy a new hard drive, you reinstall it, or something cataclysmic, like your whole computer is gone and you have to buy a new computer and it's brand new installation of all your stuff for all the things that you do and all the tools. Depending on the kind of person you are, that may not be a big deal. In fact, one of the interesting things speaking to my wife was her remarking that, wow, this would not be at all an impact to her because she just has a couple of programs she really uses for her work. It's nothing super complicated and she doesn't tend to customize things a lot. But I have software like OBS or my recording production software, DaVinci Resolve, where I have just tons and tons of customizations and plugins and all kinds of things like that. And so the impact is severe, right? Or things like for recording videos where I have like lighting settings and just any number, audio settings, all kinds of things like that. So that can be significant. The first thing to do is to know what you're even going to reinstall. And I've adopted from long ago a technique that's pretty good, which is I just keep a document, very simple, listing all the software on my computer. And when I install some new program, it goes on that list. And if there's something special about it, like a plugin or a particular setting or something I turn off or whatever, that, something that I do beyond the normal, I note it in that document. If there's a license key and it isn't in a particular usual place, or something that I know it's not just a password, then that's in that document, right? And this means that if I have to start over from scratch, I know exactly what to reinstall. And in fact, it even has an order to it based on previous, like when I get a new computer and things like that. So I'm ready to go down the list and just install all the things I need. Everything from browsers and how I use them. Like I use more than one browser so that I can be in podcast mode versus me and things like that, right? So all of that is all documented in this. And I have a place on my backed up drive, my secondary drive that is also backed up routinely, where I keep all of my installation files. And this means that when I have to recover something, or if something corrupts and I need to reinstall it, I've got all those files available. So I can go to this directory and to my document, and I can say, okay, here's my document. I need to reinstall this software. There's the file I used before. And that can be important because sometimes we install a particular version of something, but the website for the company, for the software, may have another version. And there could be compatibility issues with that. So keeping the version you installed is important, or knowing where to get it. Like Microsoft Office, I don't pay for subscriptions. I use an old version that I like better than the new ones. And I know exactly how to get that if I ever need to reinstall it from experience. And so I have that, and I can do everything I need to do to get the license in there and get Microsoft to approve it and so on. So by doing those things, you're set up to get your software back. The problem is, and this is the big discovery I had, despite kind of being aware of it and kind of trying, but I didn't do a good enough job, is that a lot of software has settings that are kept on the operating system. So for example, the software that I use to produce these videos, I have files, and those were all backed up. Then I have project files and project settings and the software settings themselves. And I had not done a great job of backing those out, which meant that the only place where they really existed in their current version, right, with all the work that I'd done to tweak those programs, was found in a combination of folders on the Windows drive. And I had to spend a lot of time looking up where those folders were and recovering them from my damaged hard drive, which looks like this. That's the hard drive. So I had to connect it via a small kind of interface that you can use to connect to your computer and go through and find that file structure and pull those things back in and then copy them over, which only works if you have the same version and all of that. So it took a lot of care. What you can do is find out for software where you have a lot of settings, how can you back that up regularly so that you have it to recover? My podcast and video production software, for example, has a combination of a library and then it has projects. And both of those should really be backed up so you can restore whichever ones you need. And then everything can be in its right place. And if you're rebuilding a whole computer, you need to make sure that what you're going to back up from those OS settings matches the structure of your computer. So we talked about having a secondary drive, and let's say it's called, your D drive. Well, if suddenly you have it as your E drive, nothing's going to map across when you restore, right? So you have to have things that go to the right place. If you decide to change, you will have to do all that manual work to remap things because things will not be found, and you will have to somehow compensate for that. So keep that in mind as you're restoring things or setting yourself up to restore. That the structure should be the same and all the settings must match. So you can imagine something that's easy to forget when you're thinking about your software recovery is, for example, let's say you have a music player and you have a lot of, if you don't do the kind of digital online music and you play digital files off your hard drive, your playlists map to certain locations. And if that folder structure isn't restored exactly the same with the same drive letters, the same paths, it doesn't work. And you lose all that. And if you didn't bother backing up your library and your settings, you'll start all over, right? You'd have just a bunch of music files on a folder and you would have to set it all up from the very beginning. This is true of any software like that, right? If you have a bunch of plugins and settings for some sort of art software, you will have to set that all up unless you captured it and backed it up. So find out where those settings are stored, where it's housed, back those folders up. So set it up to be part of your automatic backup process so that worst case, you have that being copied all the time. And then also do exports, whatever the process is that the software gives you to have a export and an import, make sure you have that in place. I should also say that when you make that documentation, like really try to think about everything that you use, because there are a lot of things that are easy to forget. For example, peripherals, like if you have a printer and the settings and the files and the drivers and anything special you do for that, how to set that up, or fonts, really easy to forget that you might have a bunch of custom fonts. Maybe you purchased them, and if you kind of just purchased a font and install it and forget, finding that or even remembering that you had a font and what the name of it is, how would you do that, right? You might just not even remember. So you have to kind of get into a habit if you want to be in a place to be fully recoverable, where when you do something like buy a plugin, a font, a whatever, you are placing that into a drive so that you can get it back. So my folder that has all my installation files also has a folder for my fonts because I have a lot of fonts. And then you also, on top of that, need to write an instruction to yourself about anything special related to those so that you can restore them and remember to do that. One last tip. When I will install software, I often will find that at some point I go back and I tweak it. And when I do that, I like to actually capture screenshots of the changes I make. So for example, let's say you've got the program that you use to capture video or audio for podcasting, for YouTubing. You might suddenly decide, you know what, I'm going to add a special audio filter, or I'm going to change the EQ on it, or something like that. And a drastic change like that can be very hard to remember what you did. What was it before? What is it now? So I will have a Word document that I will keep for that particular piece of software, and I'll screen capture the before and after. This also helps with software recovery because you can go back to it and say, oh yeah, I made that change. It used to be like this, which was the default, and then I changed to this other thing. So I will use this new setting and be set back to where I am. So even if you have to do it manually, you will have a capture of it visually, which makes it a lot easier than if you had not done that. Again, ideally a backup, an export of the software, but if you have to, you can use these documents as well. Or just in everyday life, if suddenly you realize you wish you had the old setting back, these documents help you do that. Safeguarding against catastrophic failure is not easy, but I hope that you can see that it is worth it in the long run. I just spent 2 weeks diagnosing PC problems and trying to recover as quickly as possible, twice, from catastrophic failure so that I could be up and running, making videos, creating podcasts, writing and designing, and doing my day job. So I hope you can see that in the end, if you can take these steps, you'll be better off. You will be in a position to recover more quickly, prevent damage, and know the steps you need to do to get back to where you feel good and again can create, minimize that trauma. If you found this useful, if you like the work that I do, please consider going to alphastream.org where I've got ways you can support me, or click on the link below for Patreon. I really appreciate everybody who makes these videos possible, and I will see you next time on Success in RPGs.